Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, today we begin the 15th topic of this discussion of revisiting the collection and transmission history of the Qur'an. This 15th topic actually relates to a couple of narratives according to which, if we believe those narratives, we think that the Qur'an, or we derive the fact that the Qur'an we have today is incomplete. So these narratives give the impression of the incompleteness of the Qur'an. We shall discuss both these narratives. One of them, or the first of them, belongs to the famous Rajam verse or the stoning verse, the narrative which is ascribed to generally to the Caliph Umar radiallahu anhu, besides some of the other companions as well. And then we shall deal with the suckling narrative, which is ascribed to the beloved wife of the Prophet Aisha radiallahu anha. Both of these narratives give, as I said, tell us that the Quran we have is incomplete, and therefore it is essential that we discuss and critically evaluate the texts and chains of narration of these narratives. So I will begin with the first of these, and which is the stoning verse narrative, or the stoning verse narrative, which are famous, very famous for people who know Muslim jurisprudence and who are aware of the fact that how the punishment of adultery is dealt with in Muslim sources. This particular narrative that I'm going to discuss and deal with is actually narrated in 10 different ways. It has 10 variants, and I shall discuss each of the variants separately. But just to give you a picture of what these variants say, I'm going to read out a representative text of the most comprehensive variant, perhaps, and that shall be the first variant, in fact, which we shall discuss. But as I said, first the text of this narrative, and this text I have taken from the Sunan of Ibn Majah. And it has been reported by Umar, Abdullah ibn Abbas reports from Umar. So the words are قال عمر بن الخطاب لقد خشيت أن يطول بالناس زمان حتى يقول قائل ما أجد الرجم في كتاب الله فيضل بترك فريضة من فرائض الله ألا وإن الرجم حق إذا أحسن الرجل وقامت البينة أو كان حمل أو اعتراف وقد قرأتها الشيخ والشيخة إذا زنيا فرجموهما البتة رجم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ورجمنا بعده. Umar ibn Khattab said, I fear that time will pass over people until someone will say, I do not find the verse of stoning in the book of God. So in this way, people will be led astray by abandoning a directive from among the directives of God. Bear in mind that stoning is the rightful punishment for a married man who has committed adultery, and it is established through evidence or pregnancy or confession. And I have read, الشيخ والشيخة إذا زنيا فرجموهما البتة. So this is the famous stoning verse, and I'm going to translate it the way our jurists generally translate it. Otherwise, of course, there is this discussion on the translation of the verse as well. So, necessarily stoned to death the married man and the married woman guilty of adultery. So this is how they translate it. Although, as I said, the words shaykh and shaykha and al-battata are some of the words which we shall later discuss and see whether they can be translated thus or not. God's messenger stoned criminals for this crime, and so did we after him. So the words are Rajamna Rasulullah sallallahu wa Rajamna ba'da. Now, Rajama Rasulullah sallallahu wa Rajamna ba'da. So I will now, first of all, viewers, as I said, take a look at the critique on the text of this narrative and see how the questions arise on this narrative. As I said, this narrative has been reported in 10 different variants, and this is one of the variant. So, since by and large the variants speak of the same theme, although in a couple of them we find people other than Umar ibn Khattab also narrating this verse, or talking about this verse, or the fact that a married man who is guilty, or married woman who is guilty of adultery have to be stoned to death. But nevertheless, the variants in which Umar ibn Khattab appears, they abound. Now, the first question which arises in my mind is that this narrative clearly says that there was a verse in the Qur'an which is no longer in the Qur'an, and Umar ibn Khattab has alluded to the fact that this verse he has read out this verse as Ash-Shaykhu wa-Shaykhatu iza zanaya farjumuhuma al-battata. And he is, as you can see from the narrative, he has clearly said that it has been taken out from the narrative, and he fears that time will pass and people will forget this verse. So the first question which arises in my mind is that how come a verse of the Qur'an, which is still thought to be operational, as jurists call it, of the famous term which they use for it is mansukhut talawa dunul hukum, which means that its recital has been revoked, but its directive remains. So mansukhut talawa dunul hukum means that the hukum or the directive is still operational, but its recital from the Quran has been revoked. It no longer is in the Quran. So if it's not in the Quran, the question which arises is that who took it out from the Quran? If it was the Prophet who took it out, of course he had the authority to take it out at the behest of the Almighty, and if he had done so, then no one else has the authority to put it back, because it's the Prophet himself who at the behest of the Almighty had, if we assume that it was there, it was he who had actually deleted it from there, or he had taken it out from there. Now, the second scenario could be that after the Prophet, some of the companions were guilty of this, and Umar Radhiyallahu anhu was actually referring to this period. This again is very hard to believe, because had this been the case, there would have been a strong debate amongst people, and Umar Radhiyallahu anhu would have debated this fact with the rest of the companions, and the rest of the companions would have either replied in the positive or negative, or had some discussion with him as to what he's talking about and what is his argument in this regard. But we find no such report or no such discussion being reported in history. In fact, this is even more strange, because Umar Radhiyallahu anhu, we know, is a person who would not be let out. He would not sit calmly if he would think that there is something missing in the Book of God. The temperament that has been communicated about him in the history books and the way we see him is a person who would have his own way. And just let me point out that there is a narrative in the Musnad of Ahmad which actually says that Umar Radhiyallahu anhu spoke certain words which are totally uncharacteristic of him. So there is this narrative in Musnad Ahmad which says that أن عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه خطب الناس فسمعه يقول ألا وإن أناسا يقولون ما بال الرجم في كتاب الله الجلد وقد رجم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ورجمنا بعده. And now the point that I'm going to make is now coming, and the words are ولولا أن يقول قائلون أو يتكلم متكلمون أن عمر رضي الله عنه زاد في كتاب الله ما ليس منه لا أثبتها كما نزلت. So this says that Umar is actually expressing his fear that would people not condemn him, that Umar has actually made an addition in the Book of God by adding something which was not in that book, I would have written in the Mus'haf the way it was revealed. This is what Umar has expressed in this narrative. Now, if we can clearly see that Umar Radhiyallahu anhu would be a person, or was a person who would have not have feared people or the comments of people or the rebukes of people, that if he thought that something was the part of the Book of God, then he would not have feared people commenting on that, because if something it is true, he is a person who would have fought for it or even laid down his life for it if need arose. So it seems that it is very uncharacteristic of Umar's that if he thought there was a addition to be made, he should have made it, and he would have at least discussed it with other companions, or other companions who would have debated this issue with him. And the fact of the matter is that the non-existence of this verse from the Quran itself shows and speaks volumes of the fact that the way this narrative has been interpreted, it raises serious questions. How come a verse which is part of the Quran is no longer no longer a part of the Quran? This is quite understandable. The fact which is incomprehensible is that a person of the caliber of Umar is saying that was part of the Quran, it was taken out, it should have existed there, and had he not feared that people would have condemned him for adding something to the Book of God, he would have done so. This all situation and this complete scenario is something which is beyond reasoning, and also beyond the fact that it could have taken place, because, as I said, such is the importance of this whole debate, that had this been an issue, this would have been a strong debate between the companions, and we would have found that this debate discussed in the pages of history. And also, viewers, can it be believed that all the companions, or most of the companions, were on one side in the fact that they thought that this was no longer, this was not a part of the Quran. It was only Umar and some of the other people who were insisting it was part of the Quran. So this is something which is extremely hard to digest. Now, as far as the critique on the text is concerned, this is what I had to say. But Also, let me add to this fact that there is also a juristic understanding of this verse, of this hadith actually, according to which it is generally said that this hadith and this verse which is found in this hadith and other ahadith of similar content, they abrogate a particular verse of the Quran, and in specifically Surah Nur, which is actually a verse which says that the person who is guilty of adultery, both the man and the woman, he and she shall be flogged with 100 stripes. And it is said by a jurist that this particular hadith and this particular Quranic verse is not found in the Quran, actually specifies that particular Quranic verse, and it limits it to a non-married or unmarried adulterer and adulteress. They say that people who are unmarried are actually discussed there, and their punishment is 100 stripes or 100 whips. But in the case of a married man or a married woman, it is this particular hadith and this particular verse in the hadith which sounds the actual punishment, which is stoning to death. So therefore, according to them, this particular hadith, which has this Quranic verse, specifies or in fact abrogates the Quranic verse and gives it a particular meaning and specifies it for unmarried people who commit this crime. Whereas the crime, if this is committed by married people, then it is defined and mentioned in this hadith and this verse of the Quran, which is outside the Quran. Now, Amin Yassin Islahi, one of the very profound scholars of the Quran in recent times, basing his critique on a number of textual issues as well as linguistic issues, has also challenged this understanding and this whole interpretation. First of all, he says that it is extremely unreliable. This whole hadith is extremely unreliable, and the first thing is that only the Quran can abrogate the Quran. If there has to be some specification, nothing outside the Quran, no hadith, no Quranic verse, even if it is found in a hadith or something, has the stature or caliber to abrogate or specify a Quranic verse. Only a Quranic verse can abrogate a Quranic verse. This is the first critique that he's offered. The second critique that he's offered in this regard is that generally abrogated and abrogating verses in the Quran are mentioned simultaneously, adjacently. They're almost placed adjacently, and he's given a number of examples, 3 or 4 to be precise, which clearly say that whenever an abrogating verse was revealed which abrogated a previous directive, it was placed right after the verse it had abrogated. Thus, for example, he says that, I'm not going to go into details, but you can look up his tafsir and his exegesis, in which he says that verses 183 and 185 of Surah Baqarah discuss the fasting directive, and there is a particular abrogation discussed in them, and that is discussed right after the directive which it was abrogating. Similar is the case with a verse in Surah Anfal, in which the number of believers which were required to, which were sufficient to fight non-believers is mentioned, and later on a verse is revealed in which this number is reduced, and he has given some other examples as well. So the point that he makes here is that the abrogating and the abrogated verse have always been found in the Quran. So if this was a verse of the Quran and it had to abrogate another directive, then it should have been part of the Quran. So this is against the practice and the custom and the way things are mentioned in the Quran, in which abrogating and abrogated verses are mentioned in the Quran. And then he also questions the verse of stoning him itself. He says, first of all, that the Arabic language used is highly questionable. Thus, for example, he says, first of all, ash-shaykhu wa-shaykha has been interpreted to mean the old man, the married man and the married woman. So how can a shaykh or shaykha connote a married man? Because the words ash-shaykh in Arabic means an old person. And he also says that the word ash-shaykha is very rarely used for an old woman. And again, the narrative itself does not say anything whether they are married or not. It just says ash-shaykhu wa shaykha, which of course does not necessarily mean what our jurists extract from this verse, and they extract the fact that a married man and a married woman guilty of adultery have to be stoned necessarily. So he says that there is nothing in this verse which mentions that they are married. The only thing that is mentioned is that they are old, and that too, if we consider the shaykh word, because as far as the shaykha is concerned, that does not occur in this meaning of an old woman, very common in Arabic. It's a very rare interpretation. He also says that in the way it is used in the Quran, the word shaykh, even if that is taken as has been used in the Quran, haza ba'ali shaykha, which actually is referring to a person who is not even, he's so old that he can not even procreate with his wife. So if it's taken in the terms of the Quran, then their word shaykh is actually referring to someone who is so old that he cannot even establish marital relations with his wife. So how come this word a shaykh and a shaykha were used? So this is a question that he has posed on this in the text of this verse. Then he has also said that the style of the verse in which it is mentioned is ay shaykha wa shaykha. He says that in general, the way things have been mentioned in ahadith of similar style are that they mention words such as al-bikru bil-bikr or as-sayyibu bis-sayyib. And on this contention, the word should have been ash-shaykhu bis-shaykh, not ash-shaykhu was-shaykha. Because the Quran is not, or the hadith does not say al-bikru bil-bikra or as-sayyibu bis-sayyiba. It says as-sayyibu bis-sayyib or al-bikru bil-bikr, the famous hadith. So he also questions the style of the verse. And finally, viewers, if it can be added that the word al-battata, which is used in this Quranic verse, is something of a very, very later word. It never existed in the times of classical Arabic, and it's a word which has never been used in classical Arabic, and it is highly improbable that the Prophet could have said these words. So this, he says that it is very improbable that these are not even the words of the Prophet himself, let alone regard them to be the words of the Quran. So viewers, this was as far as the understanding of the Jews is concerned, and the critique of Amin Hassan Islahi on this understanding. And if you want more details, you can look up his lectures which have been published and transcribed on the Muwatta of Imam Malik and in his tafsir, Tadabbur Quran, or the exegesis Tadabbur Quran, in which he discusses Surah An-Nur's tafsir. So that is something that you can look up. But I just wanted to indicate the fact that as far as the questions which arise, they are not only on the text of the narrative, but also on the juristic understanding of this particular hadith. And I thought that I should present that understanding, and the way it has been criticized by a very famous scholar should also be before you. Now, viewers, let's move on to the chain of narration of these narratives. And as I said, there are 10 ways in which this narrative has been reported. And the first of them, viewers, was the one in which I just read out to you. The representative text that I read out to you first is the first of these ways or variants that we're going to discuss. And there are actually 10, as I said, a total of 10, but we start off with the first one. And this has been discussed, as I said, in the Sunan of Ibn Majah. But you can see the chart that is being displayed before you discusses this narrative. And as you can see, that this is reported by Abdullah ibn Abbas from Umar ibn al-Khattab. And from Abdullah ibn Abbas, the person who reports is Ubaidullah ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah. And as you can see, the narrative is being displayed before you. I'm going to comment on the chain of narration presently, but just consider that the students of Zuhri who report this narrative in which this verse, this stoning verse is found, is being displayed before you. And there are three students of Zuhri. One of them is Sufyan ibn Uyayna, the other one is Malik ibn Anas, and the third is Yunus ibn Yazid. So these are the three students of Zuhri who report this narrative such that the existence or the presence of the stoning verse is found in the text of this narrative. Now, we also have, viewers, some other variants of the same narrative which do not have the stoning verse. So I'm going to read out that narrative also before you, and then I'll show how that narrative has been spread out in various books of hadith. But let me just also point out the fact that a representative text of the same narrative which is devoid of the stoning verse. Now, this narrative, viewers, is now being displayed before you, and it is found in the Muslim, in the Al-Jami' al-Sahih of Imam Muslim. And the words are, قال عمر بن الخطاب وهو جالس على منبر على منبر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله قد بعث محمدا صلى الله عليه وسلم بالحق وأنزل عليه الكتاب فكان مما أنزل عليه آيات الرجم قرأناها ووعيناها وأقلناها فرجم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ورجمنا بعده فأخشى إن طال بالناس زمان أن يقول قائل ما نجد الرجم في كتاب الله فيضل بترك فريضة أنزلها الله وإن الرجم في كتاب الله حق على من زنى إذا أحسن من الرجال والنساء إذا قامت البينة أو كان الحمل أو الاعتراف. So you can see it is very similar to the first narrative, but it is devoid of the stoning verse itself. It just states that the punishment of people who have committed adultery and are married is stoning. So the translation of this text would be, Abdullah ibn Abbas states that Umar, while sitting in the pulpit of God's messenger, said, the Almighty has sent forth Muhammad with the truth and revealed the book to him. Among what was revealed to him was the verse of stoning. We read it, memorized it, and fully comprehended it. God's messenger stoned criminals, and after him we also did so. I fear that time will pass over people until someone will say, we do not find the verse of stoning in the book of God. So in this way, people will be led astray by abandoning a directive revealed by God. Indeed, stoning is the rightful punishment for a married person who has committed adultery, whether man or woman, and it is established through evidence or pregnancy or confession. Now, viewers, I should also like to present before you the schematic illustration of the variance of this narrative in which this stoning verse is not present but just referred to. And as you can see that it is being displayed before you. And this is a rather comprehensive and a rather detailed schematic illustration that you can see. But you can clearly see that if all the variants are analyzed, we can see that there is only one student who is actually transmitting the stoning verse in the narrative, and he is Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Looking at the isnad of the narrative, we can clearly see that although there is also Yunus ibn Yazid and Malik ibn Ans, if you refer to the first of these schematic illustrations, that he also, these two also narrate the stoning verse, but as I shall comment later on, that these the variants of these two branches of the narrative are actually very weak. So in practicality, we can only see Sufyan ibn Uyayna narrating this narrative with the stoning verse. As far as people who do not narrate the stoning verse are concerned, from Zuhri, we can see they are Ma'mar ibn Rashid, and for example, this is in the Sunan of Tirmizi. We have Salih ibn Kaysan, which is in Bukhari. He is a student of Zuhri who does not narrate this narrative with the stoning verse. Then we have Yunus ibn Yazid himself. So here he is not narrating the stoning verse. And this can be found in the Muslim, in the Al-Jami' Sahih of Muslim. Then we have Malik ibn Anas himself. He too is also not narrating the stoning verse. And this can be found in the Muwatta of Imam Malik. So Ubaidullah ibn Abi Bakr, he also reports from Zuhri, and his narrative has been recorded by An-Nisai in his Sunan al-Kubra. Then we have Husham ibn Bashir. His narrative is recorded by Abu Dawud in his Sunan. Then we have Uqayl ibn Khalid. Also, his narrative is found in the Sunan al-Kubra of An-Nasai. And then we have Muhammad ibn Harb in the Musnad of Abu Awana, Abbad ibn Rashid in the Tarikh of At-Tabri, and Sufyan ibn Uyayna himself in Bukhari's Jami' al-Sahih. So these are the students of Zuhri who do not report the addition of this verse in the narrative. And you can clearly see that Sufyan ibn Uyayna is also a person who in this particular variant does not report this addition. In that variant which you saw in the first illustration, he was reporting this variant. So this clearly tells us that there is something else to this whole story. And what can also be seen, that Imam Nasai is reported to have said that it seems that this verse is a wahm, or a figment of imagination of Sufyan ibn Uyayna. He has said this in his, this is how he comments in his Sunan al-Kubra regarding this. I can also would like to narrate before you viewers the words of Sufyan ibn Uyayna, which have been recorded in the Musnad of Al-Mawrid at the end of a certain narrative. But just let me read out the narrative. This narrative is reported by Abdullah ibn Abbas from Umar ibn al-Khattab. So he says, Sami'tu Umar ibn al-Khattab al-Mimbar yaqul anna Allah ba'asa Muhammadan bil-haq wa anzala alayhi al-kitab wa kana mimma anzala alayhi ayat al-rajm farrajama Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa rajamna ba'da qal. Now this qal is to be noted. فَقَدْ سَمِعْتُهُ مِنَ الزُّهْرِ. So this is actually Sufyan ibn Uyayna says that I heard this from Zuhri. بطوله فحفظت منه أشياء وهذا مما لم أحفظ منها يومئذ. So the translation of this complete narrative is that the Almighty has sent forth Muhammad. This is what Umar ibn Khattab is saying. The Almighty has sent forth Muhammad with the truth and revealed the book to him. Among what was revealed to him was the verse of stoning. So God's messenger stoned criminals, and after this we did too. Sufyan said, this is Sufyan, I heard the whole narrative from Az-Zuhri and learned some of its content by heart. However, I could not memorize this verse on that day. So again, you can see viewers that Sufyan ibn Uyayna himself saying that he could not memorize this verse properly, which speaks volumes of the fact that if this verse has been attributed to him, then it as in the words of Nasai, it could clearly be a figment of his own imagination. And viewers, the fact that this qala, which is at the end of the narrative, qala faqad samitahu, as you can see from your screen, people can argue that it was actually Ma'mar who is reporting this narrative from Az-Zuhri. You can see from the chain of narration that this qala is also said by Ma'mar. So Ma'mar should be the person who is saying this, but this can clearly be refuted by the very next narrative in Humaydi's Musnad, which tells us that these are the words which these are the words which actually spoken by Sufyan ibn Uyayna. And viewers, I should also like to add that Ibn Hajar, the famous commentator of Bukhari, in his Fathul Bari has said that Al-Bukhari may have intentionally omitted the variant in which this verse has been present because of these problems. So viewers, we can clearly see that the way this variant has been reported, the students of Zuhri who speak of this narrative but do not report this verse of the Qur'an in that narrative, there are many, and they include Sufyan ibn Uyayna himself. And I had said earlier on that two of the other persons who report this addition or this verse in the narrative are in fact Malik ibn Ans and Yunus ibn Yazid, as you can see from the very first illustration. And I had said that that narrative is weak, and now I'm going to comment on that narrative. And the issue is in that particular narrative. And yours, I should also remind you that this narrative has been recorded by Khatib in his Tarikh Baghdad. So the reason why both these variants are unreliable, the one which contains Yunus ibn Yazid and Malik ibn Ans, is that both of them are the person who narrates from both of them is Umar ibn Harun, and he is extremely suspect. So Umar ibn Harun, who narrates, as you can see from your screen, who narrates from Malik ibn Ans and Yunus ibn Yazid, he is extremely suspect. Az-Zahabi records, in the opinion of Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, Ahmad and An-Nasai, he is matrukul hadith. Abu Ali al-Nisaburi regards him to be matruk. Yahya ibn Ma'in says that he is a dirty liar. Kazzabun khabis are the words that he says. And he is laysa bishay. Salih Jazara also calls him a liar. Ali ibn al-Madini and Adar Qutni regard him to be za'ifun jiddan. And As-Saji says, fihi zurf. Ibn Hamban says that he narrates mu'azalat from trustworthy narrators. So these are the comments that we find regarding Umar ibn Harun, who narrates from Yunus ibn Yazid and Malik ibn Ans. So we have to disregard those two the way they have been reported. And what is further against this is that all these three narrators from Zuhri which report the addition of this verse, Sufyan, Malik ibn Ans and Yunus ibn Yazid, also figure in other variants in which they do not report this addition. So this becomes very strong that perhaps it was only Sufyan to whom this addition can be attributed, because Yunus ibn Yazid and Malik's variants are very weak due to Umar ibn Harun, and Sufyan too, as we can see, has reported this narrative without the addition of the verse, of the stoning verse. And we have also seen how he himself has reported in a narrative of Humaydi that he had not completely memorized this verse, and we don't know what happened. And as Nasai has said that it was perhaps a figment of his own imagination. Now, viewers, I would also like to present some more details in this regard, and that is that there are some other variants of this narrative also, in which Abdullah ibn Abbas does not directly report from Umar ibn Khattab, and we have Abdul Rahman ibn Auf in between these two. And as you can see from the schematic illustration which is being displayed before you, Abdullah ibn Abbas does not directly narrate from Umar ibn Khattab. And here in these variants, this verse of stoning is not present. It is devoid of this verse, all these variants. So this is also an important point to note. And let me also add that there is another group of variants which contain this verse and in which Yusuf ibn Mihran reports from Abdullah ibn Abbas, who reports from Umar ibn al-Khattab. This is weak because of the presence of Ali ibn Zayd ibn Jud'an and Yusuf ibn Mihran himself. And as you can see, a schematic illustration being displayed before you. So in this particular narrative, Abdullah ibn Abbas reports from Umar ibn al-Khattab, and from Abdullah ibn Abbas we have Yusuf ibn Mihran, and from Yusuf ibn Mihran we have Ali ibn Zayd ibn Jud'an. These variants, the way they have been displayed before you, they contain the stoning verse, but they are extremely weak, as I said, because of the presence of Ali ibn Zayd ibn Jud'an and Yusuf ibn Mihran. And I would like to comment on both these people, as has been recorded by Al-Mizzi and referred to him in his Tahzib al-Kamal. So Al-Mizzi says about him, Ibn Sa'd's view about him is فيه الزعف ولا يحتج به. Salih ibn Ahmad ibn Hanbal reports his father's opinion as Laysa bil Qawi. So this is what Ahmad ibn Hanbal's opinion is. Others have reported Ahmad ibn Hanbal as Laysa bi Shay and Zaif al-Hadith. This is how others have reported Ahmad ibn Hanbal to be commenting upon Ali ibn Zayd ibn Jud'an. Yahya ibn Ma'in says that he is Laysa bizak al-Qawi. So other opinions attributed to Yahya ibn Ma'in about Ali ibn Zayd are Zaif, Zaifun fi kulli shay, Laysa bi shay, Laysa bil hujja. Al-Ijli opines Yuktabu hadithuhu wa laysa bil qawi. According to Ibrahim ibn Yaqub al-Juzjani, he is Vahil hadith, Zaif and La yuhtajju bihi. In the opinion of Abu Zur'a, he is Laysa bil qawi, and in the opinion of Abu Hatim, he is Laysa bi qawi, Yuktabu hadithuhu wa la yuhtajju bihi. An-Nasai says that he is Zaif. Abu Bakr ibn Khuzaymah says La yuhtajju bihi li zurfi hifsihi. Al-Hakim expresses his opinion as Laysa bil mateen indahum. Laysa bil mateen indahum. And Al-Daraqutni says fihi al-leen. Shu'ba's opinion about him is Kana Rafa'an. Hamad ibn Zayd says about him Kana yuqallibul ahadith. And Ibn Uyayna and Wahab have said that he is, the words are Yuzarafa. Yuzarafu. Both have regarded him to be weak. And Abu Wahab says Kana haikan. Now, Ibn Hibban, after citing his jar on him, says, Istahaqqa tarq ala ihtijaj bihi. And he is worthy of being forsaken and adduced from. Now, Ibn Hajar says that he is Vaif. Now, regarding Yusuf ibn Mihran, who is the other narrator, as you can see from the arrow being indicated on the chart before you, Ibn Hajar records that he is Layyan al-Hadith, and that the only person to narrate from him is Ali ibn Zayd, and that the only person to narrate from him is Ali ibn Zayd ibn Jud'an. And as you can see from the report, so he is the only person who narrates from him, which in other words mean that Yusuf ibn Mihran is majhul. Now, viewers, this is as far as this particular variant is concerned. We shall discuss the remaining 9 variants in the subsequent talks. But before I close this talk, I would just like to add that the question here may arise that if the text of the alleged stoning verse does not have any authentic provenance, as has been clearly shown here, that in variants in which the stoning verse is present, they are extremely weak. Sufyan ibn Uyayna is the only person who reports that, and we can see how our past authorities have viewed that. And we've also seen that in some of the other variants in which this stoning verse has been reported are extremely weak because of the narrators which report this narrative. But the fact is that a question which may arise in our minds is that there are other narratives who do not speak, who do not quote or cite the stoning verse, but they refer to it implicitly. And and let me quote the verse of Umar. He says that I fear the time will pass over people until someone will say, we do not find the verse of stoning in the book of God. So in this way, people will be led astray by abandoning a directive revealed by God. Indeed, stoning is the rightful punishment for a married person who has committed adultery, whether man or woman, and it is established through evidence or pregnancy or confession. This we have seen is the case with several narratives, and the one I have just read out is from the Muslim of Al-Jami Sahih of Imam Muslim. So Umar is actually referring to a verse of the Quran, although this verse in these variants has not been cited. So if my conclusion in this regard is that the variants which do contain the stoning verse are weak, then the onus of explaining other variants in which, although this verse is not present, but we find Umar referring to a particular verse. So then which particular verse is he referring to if the stoning verse is something which this analysis shows to be not present or weak in its provenance? In this particular regard, viewers, I would like to introduce you to the research of Imam Hamid Farahi. And he, in his famous work, Ihkam al-Usul bi Ahkam al-Rasul, has shown that the punishment of Rajam was actually derived from another Quranic verse, and that particular verse is the verse 34 of Surah Maida, in which people who were guilty of spreading anarchy and disorder and other similar crimes, including rape, etc., were punished by taqtil. The Quranic words in that particular Quranic verse are an yuqattalu, which means to kill people guilty of spreading anarchy and disorder in the land in an exemplary manner. So Farai posits, and this has been also cited by his student Amin Hassan Islahi, that an yuqattalu means to kill someone in a very exemplary manner, in a very harsh manner, in a very severe manner. And he says that rajam actually is a form of taqtil, is a form of killing a person in an exemplary manner. And according to him, it is this verse of Surah Maida which is the source of the stoning verse. And Umar, in all probability, when he was referring to the fact that people might forget, he was actually referring to this particular verse of Surah Maida, and he was pointing out the fact that people might forget that this is the source of the stoning verse, and had it been in his own authority, he would have written it on the margins. This is what I surmise, that he would have actually said that he would have written this verse of Surah Maida on the margins or at the end of the Musaf, because I have even found words of similar effect. Thus, for example, there is this word Nahiyatul Musaf, which is present in the Musaf of Imam Ahmad and Hanbal, which actually means that Umar says that he would have written this verse on the margin of that particular page of the Musaf, so that wherever an yuqattalu is mentioned or the rajam is mentioned, people would know that the source of the rajam punishment is actually an yuqattalu, or verse 34 of Surah Maida. This word of Surah Maida. Also, viewers, there is another variant in which the verse is fi akhir waraqa, which means the last page of the Musaf. And this is found in Abu Nu'aym's Hilyat al-Awliya. So this means that Umar was actually saying or telling us that he would have written the alleged stoning verse in the text of the Quran, meaning that he would have written the verse 34 of Surah Al-Ma'idah on the margins of the Musaf, or at the end, telling us that this was actually the verse which was the source or the actual origin of stoning. So this is how I would explain this in the light of the research of Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, because taqtil is actually mentioned in the Quran, and rajam or stoning to death is just a form of taqtil. So in my whole analysis, I would say that the stoning verse narratives themselves are weak, and other narratives which do not have the stoning verse do refer at the behest of Umar ibn Khattab to a narrative, to a Quranic verse without referring it. But if we analyze this in the light of the research of Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, we can clearly see that actually Umar ibn Khattab was referring to the Taqtil verse, or the Hiraba verse as the famous name is, of Surah Maida, and this explains what he was actually saying. So inshallah, in the next talks, viewers, we will look at the other 9 variants of this narrative and see how they stand to the test of historical criticism. Till then, أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.